Because that's out of your.
Well, but I mean, we'll go where the need is.
I completely forgot about that. Who is your
Order, June 5th, 2017, 5:45. Can we go ahead and do a roll call real quick?
Walther,
Yes?
Carter.
Here.
Hicken.
Here.
We'll do a pledge of allegiance. Susan, you want to start us?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right. I think everybody has an agenda, so why don't we start? I'm going to go out of order here. We'll go with some of the easy ones first here. How about we start with the review of the 2017 road program? Alan?
Okay, review of the ramp. Where we're at with that is tonight we have prepared a resolution to move forward with the construction administration and inspection with Prime. Prime has done the inspection last year. They've also been doing administration and inspection on several of our development projects. They've been taking pretty good care of us, so we'd like to move forward with that. And then the only other thing specifically on the ramp, well, I guess we have a pre-con that is scheduled, I believe, for the 20th of this month. And then the other item is looking at removing Poff Drive.
What's that?
Looking at removing Poff Drive from the ramp. When we went back through that, we talked about it, what we were doing with each street. And Andy, you specifically had mentioned Poff Drive. It was like, because I said the pavement wasn't in terrible condition, but the curbs were bad. So we looked at that again, and the pavement really isn't in very bad shape. We looked at doing it all at the same time, and whatever solution we did to try and address the curbs at the same time, because at several of the joints, the curbs are breaking out. A suggestion was made that why don't we try patching those with concrete, but I didn't want to use concrete, so we used hot mix. We cleaned them out and patched them, so I'd like to see how that holds. Potentially next year look at maybe micro-surfacing or something to that effect to hold those in there if need be, but the pavement really isn't in that bad a condition after we went back and looked.
What kind of savings is that, Alan?
Roughly $50,000.
And does the contract allow for you to make those modifications?
That is within the amount, I think it's 10% that you can take off or add to a
Modify
contract
without letting them
changing
rebid?
prices, right.
Okay. And then the last question is, in the proposal that you had for the admin and inspection, did that take that into account that Poff Drive would not be part of the program?
It did not, but it is an hourly contract.
This is an hourly contract. That was my next question on that. I've got a couple more questions on the admin and inspection. Mm-hmm. Last year, did we do the administration ourselves and let somebody else do the inspection? Is that how that worked?
Last year we had Jobs do the administration.
Okay.
Because they had prepared the plans. This year it seems like it makes more sense to have the administration and the inspection together under one contract, so that's in the same. So the inspector's reporting to an administrator that he's familiar with and such.
Did they break out the hours for each one?
They put in a cost for each one, and I think they gave us rough hours for each one. I don't know that I actually brought that with me of all the things that I did bring with me. I did not.
Do you anticipate, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Tim. Go.
Do you anticipate, you said they talked about an estimate. That's in what they think it might cost. In the end, though, will they itemize the two?
It'll come as an hourly bill each month. So it'll say inspector at the rate that is included in the proposal for so many hours, and then for the construction administrator, it'll have his rate and however many hours he worked in that period.
And do those come to you?
Yes.
and it's a not to exceed amount, which is typical.
In the rates, when you looked at it, but compared to Job's administration versus Prime's administration, are they roughly the same amount, cheaper, more expensive? Which is, do you remember offhand?
I did not look at them side by side. I went this direction more because it seemed like we had some challenges last year between the inspection and the administration, that line of communication. So this way I wanted to keep that communication was the driver of that reason.
Okay. All righty. Any other questions on the ramp? What's the duration of the ramp? You know how long it's going to take to finish the work? Is it
I believe
like a
we
6-week
put
project?
90 days
It's a
as
90-day
the window,
project.
but I'm sure it will take less than that.
You've got 90 days in the contract?
Correct.
Yep. Sorry, go ahead.
And we do recommend approval of the resolution for the inspection and administration this evening.
Okay. Any other questions that, anybody else here? Do we want to make a motion to recommend that? Do you need a motion from us? I think you're asking for it in the write-up, in Alan's write-up, so.
Well, it's already on the agenda, so typically the motions are made for something that's not on the agenda
I see.
that you bring up. So I would say during your report, during committee's report, if you want to report that the committee was in favor
Anybody
of it.
not in favor of that, through that description? Okay, so we'll say that we had a unanimous
That's great.
approval rating.
Thank you.
I'm going to go to Summit Road drainage real quick. Did you have any more discussions with our residents out there?
Yes, one of the residents had actually come in without me contacting them specifically here about a week and a half ago. And he actually apologized first. He was not, it was kind of sprung on him being on the news. So he apologized for that. But we.
Just so, does everybody know this was on, 6 on Your Side or whichever it was?
Yeah, Mike Jackson, whichever one.
Yeah, Mike
channel.
Action Jackson.
That was on after our last street committee meeting?
Correct.
Awesome.
He'd actually called me the next day after the street committee again, and I told him what we had discussed. I watched the report. It was, I would say, slightly slanted in the direction of the residents, but did not throw us under the bus. He recognized that an easement is needed to get this work done because it's on private property, so it really wasn't that bad.
So any further developments there?
No, I relayed to him the discussion that we had at street committee, that the residents would basically need to have some buy-in, and then the city would look at what we could do, kind of outline the plan that we talked about with them running a stub and us running a main line if they were amenable to that idea. Took a little while to, I guess, get that understanding that they are going to have to, do something for us to do something. And he said that he would get with the other residents and get back with me, and I have not heard back.
Well, actually, just to be clear, in my opinion, we have no obligation to do anything.
Correct.
But we are at least willing to speak about it. And another issue I would bring up, in reading the reports and reading the desire to move some money around in the budget, obviously it's June, and we've got to be really careful about what we're spending money on. In my opinion, that's just my opinion, not anybody else's, I'm sure, or it could be. But these kind of things that we have no obligation to do may be put aside. And that's going to be my thoughts, at least. So, go ahead.
Couple things. You're absolutely right. We have no obligation. This is private property drainage. I think, though, it is good to come to an understanding of what it's going to take to fix these things in case we ever do want to move forward with them. I think that's only prudent to do. Also, you mentioned moving money around in the budget. I do want to clarify, and you'll hear me say this during the council meeting, the supplemental for the Public Service Department is a zero net increase to their budget. It's just moving money from one account to another.
Well, and I appreciate that, but the way I read this, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're taking money out of something that we're not going to spend on. So, for instance, salt.
Salt, correct.
Which, if we had so hypothetically, if we'd had a bad winter and we had spent that, then we would be asking for additional funds to supplement projects that projects that weren't initially either contemplated or were evaluated at a lesser amount.
Sure.
So that's why I'm looking at it. I guess I look at it as we are looking to spend more money on other things, and because we have a salt savings, we can do so. So that, anyhow, I know you guys are on top of it. I'm just saying that as we look down the path, we may have other things, and I think we're going to talk about a couple of them tonight in this meeting that could cost us more money. And as we expend the salt savings, we just want to I want to remain cognizant of that.
Understood.
Yeah. Okay. All righty.
So a couple comments on that. I did not think that I spun it in a way, and I certainly did not intend to spin it in a way where there was an obligation on our end for Summit Road. So if I sounded that way, that was not my intent, and that's not the way that I believe I spun it to them. As far as the cost for that, I did not anticipate that being this year's budget, and I think I'd also explained that to them, that if we did do something, it probably wasn't going to be this year.
Great.
And then I think that's all I had for those things.
Okay. Go ahead, Tim.
Can you refresh my memory as to what that cost is generally? I know what we agreed on was the large collector, the long collector pipe, or I don't know what you call it because I'm not an engineer. But,
You're exactly right.
Oh, okay. And we would be hiring somebody to do that, or we would be putting that in?
The way that we had discussed would most likely be the Public Service Department installing that. It was roughly 1,200 feet, and I think off the top of my head we were looking around 75,000 was not the number because we decided that was too high. I think we could do it in-house for about 20,000 or less.
Okay. That's one of the things I wanted to hear. So, just to refamiliarize myself with.
Okay.
Thank you.
So next steps on this, or we're waiting just to hear back from the residents?
Waiting to hear back from the residents.
Perfect. Okay. So let's go up to Oak Meadow.
Okay.
Let's talk about that a little bit. So Alan and I have talked last week, briefly met regarding Oak Meadow, and it is showing to be somewhat more complicated than originally thought. I don't know if Alan's talked to anybody else about it, but I'm going to let him go through a very big description, or a detailed description of it. I'm going to tell you basically what I understood from the meeting was we've got some drainage concerns. We don't have an outlet for a good portion of the drainage on Oak Meadow. We have some other concerns regarding a water line, which was not contemplated as far as what kind of cover we're going to have over that water line when we get done with the initial. The initial 30% design has shown us a few problems. I'll start with that. That first one is the water line issue. Second one is a drainage issue that we don't have an outlet, an adequate depth of outlet for, is it Horizon? What's the street?
Hickory.
Hickory. Okay, at Hickory. So Alan had some ideas. We talked about some ideas on how to move this around. And when I mean we're short or we have problems, this is a $150,000 problem. Is that correct?
Roughly.
So on top of the budget, or what we've been talking about as far as the budget. Go ahead.
More like 200 to 250,000.
I guess I'm already assuming that we've taken care of the water line. So I guess I took that 100,000 out. Okay, so let's call it
Yes.
250,000 with those problems in there. And then, you're right, Alan. I'm sorry, I had that in my mind already. So I'm going to let Alan go ahead and give us a breakdown of everything.
Okay, and I'll start out with the second page here with the Oak Meadow stuff. After the cost estimate, the first cost estimate is the email that I'd sent to Andy. I thought that had fairly well summarized the concerns that I had and what we had kind of met to review and put our heads together on. So the first page is the 30% cost estimate that came with a 30% set of plans. A few things of note on that. One, with contingencies, the construction total is about $660,000. We had penciled in a $450,000 budget for next year, but that $450,000 also included any construction administration and inspection that we would need. We did not budget it. We haven't penciled in or budgeted a separate line item for that. So that's a bit over what we were looking at. The couple of the main things, one, the water line. That was put in here. We would need to do some more investigation if this is the route we decide to go, to see if that 100,000 is needed or not. There's no depth known on the water line, and that's why that's in here. And that's really the major thing that we could do away with potentially on this cost estimate, if we could do away with anything. The other items, like Andy mentioned, are the drainage. When Jobs looked at this initially, they did the survey. They said, hey, where are we taking this water to? Because they recognize that the water from Oak Meadow can't go anywhere. So my instructions to them were to design it at minimum that it'll be functional, and tell me what the difference will be at the side streets. So they did that in the 30% set of plans, And we're looking at the low point of the project is basically Hickory Drive. And at Hickory Drive, we would need to be 2.25 feet lower with the ditches or with drainage to get the water from Oak Meadow to the creek. And the drainage is really the problem here. I'd taken some photos after some rains we've had, and even a couple, 3 hours after it's rained, the water's still sitting on the road. It can't get to the creek. It can't get away from Oak Meadow Drive. So that is the second problem. The third is the grading. When we look at widening Oak Meadow Drive and then putting ditches back in, the grading for those ditches gets outside of the right-of-way. One, to tie them back in several places, so that would be, we would probably need temporary easements for that just to tie the ditches in. In a couple places, we would probably need permanent easement or right-of-way because the center line of the ditch, the proposed ditch, would be at the location of the existing right-of-way. So to be able to maintain that ditch, we would need a little bit more area. So, all that being said, I looked at what we could do differently to get this to work. The first thing, the initial problem that was brought to us was accessibility, I believe, for the park, and being able to walk along that road, and then the condition of the road itself. So considering those things, we looked at, well, Andy and I talked about a slightly different way of looking at this, I guess, which I look at it 3 different aspects. One would be the drainage on Oak Meadow itself. One would be the drainage from Oak Meadow to the creek, and, sorry, the drainage is all one, sorry. The sidewalks is a second aspect, or getting the pedestrian facilities, and the third is the actual roadway itself. So to cut this down, my thoughts, and I don't think Andy's were too dissimilar, are the third sheet in the Oak Meadow, which has, it's another cost estimate that breaks it down into, actually on this one, it's broken down into 4 parts. First part is we got to get the water away from Oak Meadow Drive, so that's the Hickory Street. That would be running an 18-inch down Hickory and a 24-inch from Pat Haven to the creek. There would be 1 easement involved in that, potentially 2, depending on how people would work with us, and that's not included in this estimate. This would be for a contractor to do it. On the Hickory Drive, there's potential that we could do that in-house and save a good amount of money. Doing Hickory Drive, it's roughly 900 feet of pipe. That would take us a little bit of time, but it would not be too bad, and is at least something to consider. Second aspect here is the storm sewer on Oak Meadow, and this is looking at basically piping most of it in all the way down, up and down Oak Meadow. I think this was put together fairly quickly. I think some of the costs are a little high, so I think that $364,000 subtotal number would be a little bit high. I'll go ahead and move on to the overlay of Oak Meadow Drive. This would be basically just doing a mill and a fill on Oak Meadow Drive without any widening. Part of me thinks that if we widened it, people are going to start driving faster, which is a kind of a complaint we get in a lot of the subdivisions as is people driving faster. So if we just went with the current width and repaved it, and then the fourth aspect is add a sidewalk and do it only on one side of the road. When we looked previously, we were looking at both sides of the road, but I think with piping it in, we could easily at least design for it on one side of the road. And that all comes down to how would this all get paid for. A couple ideas on that. One, we just received we're going to be receiving, we received the cost estimate for it, we haven't received a check for it, is fee in lieu of for sidewalk at the AEP project. So we just passed the fee in lieu of resolution, or I'm not sure if that might have been an ordinance. Anyhow, that's in place now. So that was for $70,000. So that would at least fund or go a good ways towards funding the sidewalk portion of this. If we designed it, put it in as a design, maybe did it as by others, but we could get the sidewalk in using those funds. The storm sewer on Hickory, like I said, we could probably do that in-house, do it quite a bit cheaper. I'm guessing roughly half of the cost that's shown here, so somewhere around 60,000. Don't have the money in this year's budget for it, but potentially we could look at that next year. And then that relieves the storm sewer on Oak Meadow and the overlay on Oak Meadow, which is just about what our $450,000 penciled in number was. So that's a lot to digest, but questions?
Anybody, go ahead.
Do we know, is the sidewalk on Oak Meadow the most pressing sidewalk issue we have in the city? Is that where we would want that fee in lieu of money to be spent first? Or is there a list somewhere of ratings of how bad the sidewalks are?
There is no list of ratings of how bad sidewalks are.
Why not, PJ?
They'd all be
Harassing.
number ones.
Right, and I think we can all, you're right. One question, this takes into consideration putting the sidewalk in existing right-of-way.
Yes.
So it certainly is something that we would want to take a look at if people were interested in having sidewalk, that they could pay to have their sidewalks put in. It's certainly something we can take a look at. At the end of the day, there certainly is a concern about people getting to the park, and I don't want to downplay that. But the biggest issue I see right now is the asphalt on Oak Meadow. And I think that's what we need to try to address, starting out with drainage and redoing the asphalt. For their, is that the most pressing place? Well, there certainly is a need for it, but I'm sure there are other areas in the city we'd love to have sidewalks, crosswalks, you name it.
Right on.
Two things. One, I had forgotten to mention that the first cost estimate did not include any drainage getting it away from Oak Meadow. So that 650 was 650 plus any additional drainage on Hickory. So that was one of the things that really made us look at alternative ways to do this. As far as sidewalks, I'm trying to think of other areas. We know in Sugar Mill there's a couple areas that should have been done by the developer but didn't happen for whatever reason. It was before my time. And then like the Pataskala Safe Travel Plan, looking at intersections and such would be the other place that we were looking at, although you could argue that maybe Oak Meadow does fall under the Safe Travel Plan. It's just not an intersection. So those are the only two specific things that I can think of, other than where we have trees buckling sidewalks and people have issues with that.
Go ahead, Tim.
Under this plan, I want to be clear because there was a lot to digest. Did you talk about, for lack of a better term, keeping Oak Meadow the exact width that it is?
That would be in the new cost estimate from you.
And
Correct.
I don't know, for me, when we talk about roads, when we talk about that road and the amount of traffic that it has on it going back and forth, that was for me, that's more important for me, I think, than even a sidewalk.
Getting it wider?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's just me. I'm one council member. When you watch roads, cars pass on that, there's sometimes it's really tight, I think. Do you disagree?
It didn't see, I was out there, we were looking at this last week, and normal sized cars, there didn't seem to be that much of a problem to me.
Perhaps it's tight when somebody's riding a bike to the park.
In that case, yes.
And then my question would be, if you move forward with the sidewalk plan, does it totally connect all the way up to the Oak Meadow subdivision?
Yes.
So it would totally, what I'm thinking of is obviously you're providing, one of the concerns of the people on that road was we're going to see somebody get hit because, plenty of kids are having to ride their bike to practice and games and whatever the case may be. So if that alleviates, if the thought is the sidewalk alleviates that, it almost makes me wonder why we plan to widen it before.
The reason why we talked about that was it wasn't going to have sidewalks. It was going to have the widening was going to happen in the road because we were so constrained by open ditches and no easements for sidewalks. So then we went through and had an evaluation to do sidewalks and have to buy easements on top of that to get sidewalks in because we had the combination of, and I believe we had roadway, then sidewalk directly next to that roadway, or was it on the backside of the ditch? I can't remember if it was on the front side or backside.
I don't recollect.
Yeah.
I believe it's on the backside.
Okay, so it got to the point where we don't have enough room to do it, and cutting ditches are going to expose 800 feet of water line, and that's another problem.
Yeah.
So I do have, and I think there's a couple ways to do this, to look forward at this one. I think the one-sided sidewalk or one-side sidewalk is fine. I think that maybe we can look at open ditches on one side. I know this doesn't necessarily take that into consideration. You're closing all the ditches out. And then lastly, the only other question I had was, I can't remember, this has telephone poles. This has poles, correct, above ground utilities, I believe.
On the
I think
east
they're
side.
all in the backs. Okay.
If
On
it's
the
on
east
the,
side,
on the
yeah.
east side, we would want to take that into consideration in my mind on which side we put the sidewalk, which side we close in the ditch. Because if we're going to be doing ditch work, because I don't think any of this has utility relocation in it either. And we don't want to add to the problems that we might have.
True. I don't believe that with what we were looking at where the sidewalk could go, and the east side looked like it made the most sense. And I think there are poles there on the east side, you're right. But they're far enough back that I believe that we could get it in there without doing an
That's,
utility relocation.
I think if we enclose the ditches, we can get sidewalks in wherever we want them.
Right.
Basically.
Yes.
One other quick one, Alan. You've got 18 and 24-inch pipe going down Hickory. We had talked about trying to stay at a little smaller size. Is that something that's going to fit in the ditch line as it is now, or is this something that is not? Have we looked at the outlet at the stream to make sure a 24-inch has enough cover on it to get into that?
Not in detail, but I believe the answer is yes.
Okay.
We need to look at it a little bit more in detail, but I believe it will. We had about 9 feet of fall, so I'm almost certain we could make that work.
Okay. Go ahead, Mel.
I just want to point out real quick that when we're talking about a sidewalk and bicycles are not typically supposed to be on a sidewalk. That's not generally what their purpose is. So if we would want to think, if we're concerned about bicycles and in that space, I would logically think that widening a road makes more sense. Or we put it into like an asphalt trail that's more designed for biking and walking versus.
An 8-foot trail, and actually the cost for an 8-foot trail is roughly the same as a 5-foot sidewalk. So you could do something, and that's not a bad idea. That's really not a bad idea at all, and get everybody off the road. So I think those are all the pluses and minuses, Alan, that you're going to probably evaluate for us on the next time, right?
Sounds about right. With the bike trail, we already have some sidewalk on the east side at the south end.
Yes.
Up to about the commercial buildings there, but we could look at tying in that in with a bike trail, but it would just be a bike trail that started with sidewalk and ended as sidewalk up at the north end at Bent Tree. That would again go into sidewalk.
As long as we have enough room to fit it all in. Maybe some of the savings, the other thing I would look at, Alan, maybe some of the savings that could be had by not enclosing the ditch on the west side could be put into a potential scab onto to the east side to widen the road just a foot if you could, or a 1.5 feet if you could. I don't know the dimensions offhand, so I don't know what will fit. But by enclosing that ditch, we gain a lot of room.
Yes. Well, the other factor with, of course, widening the road is the cost.
Yeah.
And as far as the ditches on the west side, that could. I like the idea that you had about just adding some berm there on either side. A foot to a 1.5 feet of berm on either side would help us out with the width of the road. And as far as ditches on the west side, there's still some concern areas where we'd need to put some catch basins and such, but we can certainly look at leaving that open.
You're talking about some of the intersections that we talked about, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. You're already putting storm sewer in across the street, bringing in a piece of storm across the street and putting an inlet there is probably a smart idea. It's cheap.
And the difference there would be, the only other thing with that is there's drive culverts everywhere, and if we tried to not put it in and just catch it in certain places, we might be challenged to make it all still work without replacing a bunch of drive culverts. Something we
Culvert,
can
a drive culvert is just a culvert underneath the road.
underneath each individual drive.
Oh, I'm
so
sorry.
There's open
Thank you.
swale, culvert underneath the drive, open swale, culvert underneath the drive. And many of those are in poor condition.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think I remember.
Yeah.
So in summary, there's a lot of challenges yet. We're at 30%, hopefully, close to 30%, figuring some of this stuff out, but there's a long way to go. What's your timeframe? Next month, can we get these items, if we were to do something in the middle of July, have another, I'm not gonna, obviously, ramp's gonna be almost done, well, at least started and going full blast. This is a big issue for the next meeting. So what's your time frame for trying to conquer all these variables?
I think a month would be a good time to look back, and that way we could have good direction on whether we want to move forward with some of this or not.
Okay.
I'd like to get an estimate to confirm, not that I don't believe Andy, but make sure that the asphalt doesn't suddenly skyrocket, price of asphalt goes crazy or something, and so the trail concept is no longer cheaper than sidewalks, but
It
Oh, and
shouldn't be.
Shouldn't be too bad right now.
Yeah,
They've got barges and tankers full of AC right now, just waiting,
waiting for us
just waiting.
to build a trail.
It is seriously just waiting. So, okay, so anybody have anything else on that?
I would just say that I think that the trail concept is important. I've supported 100% the idea of, if we're going to be shuffling more people into this park, we ought to provide a safe passage for the people going there. By the same token, I have not given up the idea of the 3 key crossings that I think are particularly dangerous in the city. Taylor, 310, Township, and seeing safe crossings at those locations. I'm still, because like when I first heard about Poff Drive, my mind immediately went to that, and I realize that may get gobbled up someplace else, but.
Well, and I don't know, just to hit on that for a moment, we've got a graduate class at OSU had reached out to us asking about doing a travel plan for the city. So we're going to look at tailoring that to our safe travel plan, which would include those major intersections and getting people from roughly 310 over to the shopping center on Broad.
Don't forget Taylor.
yeah, and that's going to be a fall project for that class, so.
So,
The sooner we can get it done, better off I think we are.
Yep.
But I got it. That's all for me.
I did
anything
have a
else
couple-
on Oak Meadow?
I did have a couple questions on that. So I've got look at the bike trail, leave the ditches on the west side open. I was doing a lot of talking, trying to listen there. What other things was I supposed to?
I think we're also looking at let me see, I got my notes back out here. What's the in-house cost savings for doing the storm?
What size storm, if the outlet can
It's
take it?
18 to 24. It's 18-inch across.
Well, we looked at,
Right, if we got enough cover, that's right.
right, if we have
Yep.
enough cover for the outlet and everything.
Yep, and 9 foot of fall, we should. It's just a matter of what we got to get into in that existing ditch. Talking about potentially, like you and I talked about putting berm on either side of the road, but also you want to look at scabbing on 1.5 feet on one side, see if that works, if that's any cheaper. Of course, that's going to. I don't think there's a center line that we really need to worry about on that road.
Not particularly.
Probably not.
No, it's not striped.
And then the last one is you're going to identify how deep the water line is. But if we're going to enclose the ditch on the west side, that solves that problem too. So that's $100,000 savings by include. So you're going to. These are the trade-offs. So plus we don't have to mess with the water line, which is good. Okay, so the last one, I think, if there's nothing else on that, Kyle Moore. We talked about this briefly, Alan. Do you want to go ahead and give an update on what you have for us on that?
Yes. Originally, Strand and Associates had provided us with I guess we talked about this last time, cost to do with full design. We realized that there were a lot of questions in that, and that affected the cost of their design. Made it go up because they weren't sure what they were going to have to deal with. So we went back and looked at doing an alternatives analysis, and there were some specific questions with that. One was, does the county have any info on the stormwater calcs? And I gave Andy at the back of yours, there's the first 11 pages of the stormwater calcs. I didn't
Okay.
provide them to everybody else. I didn't think you really want to look at them.
Probably not.
But those basically show that there's no basins needed for this, and I think that was one of the major questions we were looking at. Another question was the wetlands, and I did talk to Strand, and they confirmed that yes, that's part of the as part of the alternatives analysis. They would look at ways that we could avoid having to do any permitting, or at least minimize the permitting that we would have to do for those alternatives, and include those costs in the alternatives. And question number 3 was Jim Roberts, Jobs' review of the alternatives analysis. And I think you and I had taken slightly different flavors from that. And I confirmed with Jim that his flavor was more the flavor that I'd taken, I guess, which was more just cautionary, make sure as we move forward that it's not getting out of hand, making sure we're sticking to what we really need to do and not going overboard. So when I talked to him, he wasn't saying it was cautionary to not do it, just cautionary to stay within our means and not let it get out of hand.
I don't remember my flavor, so I'll take your word on that one. I think my flavor was, we've got a report from Jobs Henderson that says that everything works great, and what's changed from that. That's really my flavor, is why are there's something out there that the Kyle Moore residents possibly have done differently than what was in the analysis originally under the stormwater that has made this go awry.
Not that I have seen or that I'm aware of. I don't know where I would even look for that at this
Yeah.
point. The plans don't show anything much different other than that the water was going to the wetlands that's there.
As I recall, wasn't there also a question about getting with the county engineer?
That was for the stormwater calcs,
Yeah.
but Jobs had happened to do them, so they were able to provide those
Okay.
instead of the county.
Yeah, I mean, their comment here is post-development storm peak runoff rates will be no greater than peak runoff rates from equivalent sized storm under pre-developed conditions. Sounds like we don't have a problem.
From the
I mean,
report,
I'm just, I guess I'm being flippant. I don't mean to be flippant. My issue is that we're now talking about spending, what, 11,000 to study, I can't remember the number offhand. Is it
yeah,
11?
11.6. I believe.
11.6 to study this, and, okay, so go ahead and give us a little bit of any more information on that?
Other than I received calls from both the residents again today, both Denny Fife and Jack Walraff, who are experiencing the problems. They're just, they keep asking where we're at and how things are going. Aside from that, I don't really have anything specific.
BJ, what's your opinion on our responsibility to resolve these problems for the Colmore subdivision? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Oh, that's
kind
okay.
of like just, how do you
Yeah.
feel about this? Is this something that, because I see this
I go
as
back to what I
as a
said.
trend.
Well, I go back to what I said before. We certainly have inherited issues when we became a city of things that had occurred previously or occurred after we had become a city, when we still weren't firing on all cylinders, I guess I'll say. I do think, though, that, just because we inherited them, we can't just say, hey, hands off, we were dealt this hand. I think we certainly, $11,000, you can argue that's a lot of money, no doubt about it, but I also think it makes sense for us to figure out what we need to do for these things to fix them, if we need to fix them. I liken this similar to crosswalks at an intersection or pedestrian access or looking at turn signals at an intersection. What's it going to take to fix this stuff? And what does need done? So I think we certainly have some sort of responsibility since this is public water runoff. You know, it's coming from a public subdivision, public property that we own. I think this is different a little bit than the Summit Road.
Are you saying this is all coming from roadway runoff?
I'm not saying it's all coming from roadway runoff.
What public infrastructure do you think we are responsible for?
Well, there certainly is roadways up there. There certainly is public drainage up there that was designed, from my understanding, to drain into this pond. And it probably was a faulty design when it occurred.
Gotcha.
And as I was reminded today, when the pond overflows, it ends up on a city street.
Yep. It floods over Graham Road when it overflows.
And that's one of the differences that I see. I certainly get calls all the time for drainage in backyards. I'm willing to look at them and try and assess them and help a resident to understand what they need to do. But at the same time, those aren't city responsibilities. I've had several of those cases. The difference on this one is that these residents were more put in the situation. They didn't, like on Summit Road, those people bought those houses. It was a low spot. It was swampy. Maybe they bought when it was dry. They didn't realize it. The city they weren't put in that situation. They put themselves in that situation, unbeknownst or not. This one, they were more or less put in that situation by the development going in. Whether the city approved it or the county approved it at that time, that's what put these residents in that situation. And that's why I think that there's a little bit more of a part for the city on that than just leaving the residents to deal with it.
Okay.
This is on tonight's.
It is.
Resolution?
It's a
on-
resolution
on-
tonight
on
to
tonight.
authorize the contract to move forward with the alternatives analysis.
Is this, can I just ask, in the budget discussion of moving money from one to another, is this part of that budget that you're moving? Is that part of the monies that are being?
No, in the approved 17 budget, we had 30,000 set aside for design of this project. The original design numbers they came back with were higher than that. That's why we scaled it back down to an alternatives analysis to see if we really needed to do that much.
Okay, so,
So this is accounted for in the budget.
well, it is, but we're not getting a design out of it.
We're not getting a design. no.
So,
True.
so we're getting basically identification of what's wrong. Okay. Go ahead, Tim.
You know, I would also, the cautionary tale of now hearing 3 drainage issues in the city makes me wonder, you know, when, this is, just like you said, Mr. Walther, this is going to tell us what's wrong. It's not going to fix it. And there may be times when we can fix it, or there may be times when we cannot, just plain and simple. If they come back and say it's going to be $4 million, I don't know what we're going to do. I mean, but there may come a time where we begin to, streets might get crossed off a list if we deem something else more important. And I don't know, I think you've been beginning to keep track of these. I don't know if you have a gut feeling, is it so many that we're going to pay $11,000, 15 different places, or and not solve the problem, but find out what needs to be done? Or do you think that this is a special situation?
This is
that
a
a
little
loaded
bit of a
question?
special situation with the wetlands and the existing conditions. The other ones on that list are like foundation, park drainage. I think we more or less know what we need to do there. We need to, get some easements and put a new pipe in there to take that. Some of the other ones, Halloon Lane, there was a study done on that one, and that put out about 3 different alternatives, ranging between, I think, 800,000 and 1.3 million, roughly, to fix the Halloon Lane drainage problems. I don't think these are atypical. I had an idea of what I thought needed to be done. The caveat of the wetlands was brought up, so that's when we decided, well, maybe we need to investigate this a little bit more to make sure we're moving forward with the right design, if we go forward with design. And then this project, I had penciled in 300,000 for next year's budget for this project. I think we can get it done for that or less. And if we went much higher than that, I think it would become a question whether it to be done. And I know BJ is going to give me a funny look for this one, but this is why I'm working on putting together documentation for justification of a storm water utility.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anything else?
All I'll say is these are not new issues. I think they are issues that I know they're issues that have existed for a long time, and I am glad that the city is finally starting to take a look and take these serious to see what we can do instead of putting our heads in the sand and not dealing with them.
All right. Anybody else have anything on the items that are on the agenda?
I guess I would have one last question, Mr. Walther, and that's, you don't need a motion from us, from this group.
On the agenda.
It's on the agenda.
It's on the agenda. I would just, again, under the committee reports, mention it.
Yeah, I guess I'd kind of like to know how everybody feels about it. If you guys think that going forward with this is the right thing to do for about, essentially 40% of what we have budgeted for a plan to go forward to find out what's wrong. It won't give us a plan, but it's obviously the step. I mean, if we don't know where we're going, we obviously need to figure out where this problem is going to take us to. So, but as Alan said, we have other studies that we probably paid good money for and are sitting on the shelf that we're doing absolutely nothing about. So that's the flip side of it. Do we want to know what's wrong?
I'd say that it's important that we know what's wrong. I mean, especially these are active complaints that it's gone on for some time. I mean, I think if we just turn our heads from it, we're only going to end up with a larger problem later down the road. So that's the first step in identifying whether or not it's our responsibility to correct some of the problem.
First step is to identify the problem.
How you feel about it, Tim?
I agree.
Okay, I concur. I had one other item that isn't on the agenda. It's just an update on Legacy Estates. Can you give us a little bit more on that one? You have a little bit in your report. If you'll give us a 2-minute version of that.
Yep, and I prepared a little bit on that and a couple other things that we didn't put on the agenda if we wanted to talk about them. Legacy Signal, the warrants were really not that close. So knowing that, and then I also talked with Jared Nur, county engineer, about his thoughts on it, and basically that boiled down to not favorable, especially being that it did not meet the warrants. So I have went back to the developer and let them know that option looks like it's not going to be an option. So they're looking at what they need to do. I've informed them that they still need to install a turn lane at Blacks Road, and they're looking at trying to potentially cul-de-sac the other entrance that they were going to have on Watkins Road instead of putting a turn lane in there. They would have to amend the final development plan to do that and also provide a new traffic impact study. But that was their attempt at a solution.
Okay.
So that's in their court right now.
Okay.
Sorry.
There was something else that they had to do that they hadn't done yet. What was that? Was that just the
There
Blacks
were
Road
two turn lanes. There was
Turn
one
lane
on
on
Blacks Road. There's one on Watkins Road. Right.
Okay.
Is
I
that
thought there was a third item that they were responsible for that we found out after investigating this.
The Blacks Road was the second item that we found out about during investigation.
Okay.
is that common in your experience that they suddenly just say, "We'll put in a cul-de-sac"?
I haven't experienced one quite like this where we've had where there was a turn lane supposed to go in and they just wanted to cul-de-sac it instead. I like the access, but on this one, it's the access would be about 500 feet from the intersection of Watkins and Blacks, which is not exactly an ideal location for another It's right at the top of the hill.
Yeah, it's
so
real
at least they put
hilly
it at
right
the top
there.
of the hill, so that's a good location, but that falls in really close to Blacks and Watkins, which isn't really ideal.
Yeah, their turn lane, their widening would have to go almost, what do we figure, 40 feet from Blacks?
Right.
is where they would end their taper. So it's not a good design. But they do have signed plans,
Yes,
amazingly
They do have
enough.
signed
They
plans.
have signed plans.
for Watkins,
For the
but not for
widening,
Blacks.
for the widening. Yeah, Watkins, not Black. Okay, you'd mentioned you had another item on there that you wanted to
There's a couple other
touch on?
things that I thought I could give a quick update on if we want to run through real quick. Columbia Road Culvert, that is the OPWC project. We've got a resolution on for tonight for authorization to bid. We did receive the funding for, well, we haven't received it yet, but we've been told that we have the funding from OPWC for that. So we're looking at bidding, advertising June 15th and opening bids on July 11th. More or less just an update unless there's any questions on that one. The Taylor Road culvert, the one we did the emergency supplemental for, we were looking at getting 3 different proposals. We've not got those back yet. There was some discussion on the type of pipe to be used. We wanted to use plastic, but there wasn't enough cover essentially, so we're going to have to use concrete pipe. So that has been held up a little bit, but we're still moving forward with that. Any questions on that one? The detention pond analysis, the plat and plan research phase is pretty much complete, and now they're starting to go into the field work to identify, make sure of the location of all the ponds and get the status of them. And then the Mill Street culvert, we were planning on replacing that this year. We were looking at the design that came back was a recommendation for a box culvert. That got really expensive. So then we went back and said, can we just do a 60-inch pipe? That will work. So we're most likely going to move forward with that. But I wanted to see how the prices for Taylor Road came in before we looked at Mill, because it's going to be a very similar situation. And that was all the other updates I had.
One last thing. You probably have taken this into account. I just want to say, when we're paving township, probably a coordination between making sure there's no work being done on that during the street fair, because that is the only thoroughfare through. And
Dates for the street fair at the end of August.
August 17th through the 19th. But at some point, telling it's not Strauss, or who is it? Shelley, coordinating with Shelley and saying, hey, if you're going to be doing this, I don't know if you have a position as to whether you'd want it done before or after with all the extra traffic, given how soft it might be in the summer and blah, 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 but something to think about.
We will discuss that at the pre-con. Thank you for mentioning that.
One quick question. In the ramp, you have a $50,000 contingency in that, right? Would that bid into this? Do you remember offhand? If you can check, just if you'll check on that, just to make sure that got bid in. Looking at the additional cost of the administration and the inspection does actually put that over our budget, when you actually figure those in. I'm just looking at it saying, did we have a contingency in there to make sure we had I thought there was a $50,000 contingency in the ramp.
Okay. Yes and no. So the 650 was for everything, including construction, administration, and inspection. Honestly, I had lost sight of that for a minute, but we wanted to leave that 50,000 buffer, so that's why we had the engineer's estimate come in right around 600,000. Of course, they came in under that. There's contingency built into the line items of the ramp.
Contingency units.
Contingency units, correct.
Okay.
So those are built into there. And then the 38,000, I think, for the CACI still leaves us 15 to 17,000 underneath the $650,000 cap.
With POF in or with POF out?
And then once we take POF out, that would leave us roughly 65 under.
Great, that's good to understand, thank you. Okay. Anything else on your list, Alan?
That's all that I have right
That's
now.
enough, huh? Okay. Anybody else? Mel? Take a motion.
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Roll, please.
Alter,
Yes?
Hicken,
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
We stand adjourned.